I'm Justin Davis, and this is Drone Camps RC. Hey guys, welcome back to the Drone Camps channel. Today I'm going to review an FPV plane for you, and it's kind of a high wing style glider FPV plane, and it's actually a pretty moddable plane. It is a 1050mm wingspan from wingtip to wingtip. It has a little bit of dehedral for kind of a more forgiving flying style, but there's some things about this plane you should probably know, and I'm going to let you know in this review some of those changes and the things that I've done to make it fly better, and that might help you out if you guys decide to get this one, because just recently I think it was discounted to like $200 for the non-goggle version. You can also get the goggle version for a little more. It includes goggles along with it, and it actually comes with diversity goggles, which is super cool. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about the changes that I made for this review and give you kind of an honest overview about this plane. It's also made of EPO foam, which is a pretty good durable foam, and if you crash it and it breaks in half, I broke the tail off of it already, I broke the front end to the nose, but I pretty much repaired everything with a little foam safe CA, and I'm good to go. It's actually stronger than it was before, and I just left the pins in there for a little extra forward weight and actually a little better reinforcement for my CA repairs right there. So a pretty good fix for it, but we're going to go ahead and talk about what I've done for it. And if you get one of these, you definitely might want to think about doing this for your plane. So the first thing I wanted to change on this plane, once I saw this little AIO camera, the quality of it just didn't seem to be that great, so I immediately wanted to upgrade it for something a little bit better. And what I chose was the RunCam. This is the new version from RunCam. This is a Micro Sparrow 2, and it's a really nice quality. It also accepts a huge voltage range, unlike this little guy. This little guy does come pretty much plug and play, and I did have to do a custom wiring harness on this one, and I'm using the Stealth VTX, the Stealth Race VTX from Furious FPV, because I can get a maximum FPV range with that. I can get out there with 600 milliwatt and really crank it up if I want to go even up to 800 milliwatt. So 600 is going to get you way out there versus a little AIO camera like this. And I think the biggest bummer about this camera is the fact that some of these cameras actually look pretty good. The FXT cameras look great, but this one seemed to have a really dark look inside my FPV goggles, and once I got up above the tree line, I couldn't see the ground with this camera. So toss this camera if you get this plane and go with something like the little Micro Sparrow 2. That's a much better camera, and it's about $35. And the next thing you guys want to absolutely do before you fly this is go ahead and, if you can get yourself a tri-prop, maybe something like a 7-inch tri, that's going to be a much better power to weight ratio for this plane. It needs a little bit of extra oomph in it, and it's got this older Hobby King style motor that I've seen a long time ago that they used on this plane, so it could use a little bit better motor, but you have a fancy little motor stem mount in here, so it has to use this motor on this plane unless you find another motor that's compatible with a motor stem. It's not like a regular sort of race quad mount style motor, so you have to go with what you have here. But if you want to prop up a little bit, give it a little bit of extra power with an additional blade on your prop. This prop that comes along with it just doesn't have enough oomph to really kind of get it up in the air quickly. But you still do have to throw this thing like a javelin when you are going to launch it. It really takes an aggressive throw to get it nice and straight. So you're going to throw it way up and straight out. Now, aside from that little Hobby King style motor, they have a 15 amp ESC in here, and that's interesting to me. I feel like they could have done like a 30 amp ESC and probably ran this thing like 3S, and it would have had like max power and a pretty nice cruise at maybe 25% to 30% throttle, under 50% throttle. That just would have been a much better power system choice for this particular plane. And also, guys, to keep things kind of light today, we're gonna run my little Firefly camera on here. I already have the SD card in the side, and this little guy will actually run for an hour, and it'll record 1080p video on there. So, and it'll also record audio for you guys that want to record audio. And it says on the website you're only going to get like 5 minutes of flight time out of this battery. So again, I think they could have upgraded the ESC to maybe a 30 amp ESC and run this on like something like a 3S battery would probably be a better choice. Like a 3S 1800 would probably be the optimal choice for the power system as well, I think. But you just insert that battery all the way to the front of the aircraft, and that gets your CG in the right place and forward on the aircraft. But this plane has something that a lot of RC airplanes, I feel like they need for beginners. I've been talking to a lot of different companies lately, and there's a company out there trying to develop an all-in-one system for you guys that they're going to start including with their planes: GPS, return to home, return to loiter, and an auto cruise function, all that cool stuff, auto takeoff, all inside one flight controller. And this one kind of sort of does that without the use of having to use iNav. And that's cool because you don't have to use a computer and have your first flight become a total disaster because you had some little setting inside iNav wrong, and that does happen. So you can do the auto takeoff on this one. I would suggest just doing a manual takeoff first. In stabilization, you're going to keep that switch all the way to the top position and this one all the way to the top. Give yourself like 30 seconds to 2 minutes for the GPS to load and record the home point. So now I remove the canopy and I'll show you guys what's under the hood right here. Inside we have the little flight controller, and it's nice because no iNav is needed on here, no computer, no beta flight, none of that stuff. Right next to the flight controller you have the GPS, and that's not GLONASS GPS, I don't believe. I think it's just a simple standard North American satellite GPS. You do have 8-channel receiver in here. It's also DSMX compatible, so if you had like a Spectrum radio, you could bind this up with your Spectrum radio instead of using that little tiny MAC-free radio, the Topsky radio that comes along with it. So you do have some options there. You have some sort of little micro servos right behind the GPS and the flight controller as well. So overall, it's a pretty simple setup and really easy to get going. Now, the first day that I made in this plane, it was kind of crazy because it was super windy, but I did have stabilization and it was all over the place in the wind. So if you're going to fly this plane, it is really super lightweight. So you're going to want to pick your days when you fly this plane. I think a no wind situation is probably the best, or a light headwind like 5 miles an hour. Maximum 10 miles an hour with this plane is probably going to be the best setup. But the little radio that comes along with it, it's super tiny and it almost looks kind of scary how small it is, but it does have a lot of features on here. It has some telemetry on here for your onboard battery, which is nice, and it tells you the radio battery level on there, and it is based on that MAC-free system, which I've seen other planes have, and that's a kind of a cool little flight controller setup there. It does have programmable features. You can go inside this radio and change up the rates and things like that, which is kind of neat. But up and down, you can press the back button. There's 2 up arrows. Pressing ESC on the left hand side will get you into the system menus. You can go to monitor, reverse, dual rates and expo, and mixing. And actually, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add a little bit of expo on the aileron. So I'm going to go down now to the next button there, and we're just going to decrease it to about 70% because I don't need all the throw that it has. That's probably what I would suggest if you get this plane. Turn it down to about 70, and that's probably going to be the best setup for your aileron setup. So same thing on the rudder. If you want to turn that down a little bit, you can do the same thing there. So now that I have the rates lowered on the aileron and the rudder, also the elevator down to 70, I'm going to go ahead and we'll launch this guy and we'll do our first flight with it.
Truth about our way we turn it loose and up.
All right guys, that was our FPV flight. Let's go ahead now. I'm gonna put the GoPro on my head and I'll give you a little line of sight out here in the field and show you how it flies in stabilized and manual mode. And we'll test out return to home. I'm not sure if it's totally gonna work out here. There's a lot of RF in this area, but I'll give it a shot and see what it does. If it acts a little strange or squirrely, you can always flip out of it. And there's that little home button on the very top of the transmitter right here, the top left right there, it's marked H. And that should bring you back to home. So let's go ahead and give it a toss. But before I do, I want you guys to see this. If you're gonna buy this plane and you're gonna fly it, you need to see how much throw I have adjusted mechanically into the elevator. So you can see that right there. That's completely at mid stick. So I'm giving myself that much up throw on the elevator to just keep the nose of the plane up. Something very important for setup on this plane. You can see that's quite a bit of throw for up, but this little plane for some reason needs every bit of that elevator, the little extra help to keep it up. And that's gonna help your hand launch as well. All right, so let's go ahead and do some line of sight flying with it. I'm just gonna check my surfaces real quick. Throttle check again, left, right on the rudder, up, down on the elevator, and left, right on the ailerons. So I'm good to go. You're gonna go full throttle on this launch. You want all the motor power you can get with this plane. So here we go, full throttle. And it should do some auto climbing there with that rate I have set up on the elevator. So let's give it a toss. Straight as an arrow. Now the first time I threw it, it went straight toward the ground. And it's climbing pretty good. I usually just make some big wide circles and eventually I get to the altitude I want. And this plane likes a little bit of rudder, because if you use all aileron, it seems to want to wingtip stall over. And I think that's because it's seems a little bit underpowered when you're flying it. But when you're in the goggles, that makes all the difference, because then you can really keep things a lot more level and trimmed out by kind of sitting in the cockpit and watching it from that perspective versus standing on the ground. A little more precise. But I'm still full throttle, and you can back off the throttle a little bit and just cruise. Now I'm about 75 right there. Keeping that nose up. A little bit of sun came out for us. Nice. And again, I dialed the rates back to about 70. You could go even lower if you want to. Bring them down to 60 and try that. See if that's soft enough for you. If they're too high, it's going to be really twitchy. But this plane is kind of similar. It's like a remix of a Bixler, a Hobby King Bixler. And since it's sort of that lightweight foam, it's pretty durable. You could add a flight controller to this one if you wanted to put some iNav in there or put a crossfire module in there. You could go pretty long range with this guy. It's supposed to get way out there with this receiver, by the way, with the stock setup. I don't know that I trust this little tiny transmitter. And see how tight it'll turn. It'll turn on a dime. I'm just keeping it out here in front of me, having some fun with it. I'm about 80% throttle right now. And battery and flight time, I think they're wrong on the website. They said 5 minutes, but I was close to 8 minutes on my FPV flight. So I ran that battery down as long as I could for you guys to really see what this plane would do. But I'm glad they reduced the price of this plane, because I think over $300 was a high price point for this, for what it is. I think 200 is getting closer to a better buyer's market for this plane. And I think the biggest thing is that it's plug and play. So it's not something that you have to go build yourself, like a TBS Cap 2 wing. Build it all and put your own flight controller in there, which is definitely a learning experience. I would definitely recommend it sometime. But for guys who just want to fly a GPS and have RTL stabilization and all that good stuff, this one has all that. Let's go ahead and we'll go into stabilize mode. Okay, and I'll try that, go into stabilize mode there. Now it should keep my wings nice and level up there. Seems a little smoother in stabilized mode. Notice how it's not fluttering as much left and right. That's going to help you a lot. If you just want to cruise and fly FPV, you can fly and stabilize, and it's a kind of a mild experience. Keeps the wings level, so when I push to the left or right, it levels my wings back out, which is nice. Now if you press and hold, it'll put you in return to home, which it's doing right now. It's coming back to the home point, but I still have control, which is nice. And to activate that, you have to press it and hold it, and it'll actually turn around. See, it's turning around on its own and coming back to the home point. Pretty cool. So it does have RTL, or return to home. I don't know if it's going to actually land. RTL is return to land. That's probably the best you're going to get out of this plane, is if you definitely upgrade the prop on there, put a little something a little bit more aggressive on there, because the ESC seems to be able to handle it. You don't want to over prop it past a 7-inch prop. And if you want to have probably the ultimate setup, put a 30 amp ESC or a 40 amp ESC on this plane and an APC prop, and it's going to be the best, definitely the best setup, especially with a run cam on there as well. And something like a 600 milliwatt transmitter is definitely going to be a better, definitely going to be a better flying plane for you. All right, it's back on the bench in one piece. I didn't break it, and the rain is moving in. It's coming in behind me here. There's a front coming through, so there's quite a bit of wind pushing through here. If you're ever flying around a front, it's always the best idea to land your plane and get out of there, because sometimes the fronts can push like 50-mile-an-hour winds in front of them. And with all this wind, I definitely don't want this lightweight plane up there. But hopefully you enjoyed this review and you got a little closer look at the SKYEASY Aerodrone FPV plane, because honestly, I don't think there's a lot of reviews on this plane out there. I did see some other videos out in Europe where guys are putting flight controllers and full OSD and all that stuff in this plane. So I think it's capable of just about anything FPV-wise you have in mind. So a lot of room to grow with this plane and plenty of mods to do. It's a lot of fun to play around and tinker with. And if you wanted to fly it on DSMX, you can also do that. But thanks again for watching, you guys. I'm going to pack it up and run from the rain and go get some lunch. Take care. Have a great weekend. See you guys later. Bye-bye.